Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.
So nice, we had to play it twice. Welcome to the show. It's Narativ Live on a Friday night. It's the after show. And we've got a very exciting show tonight because we're talking to Noel Casler, who you see right there next to us. He's a brilliant person to have on because for many years, 6 seasons of The Apprentice, he was able to get a first-hand view of what it was like to be inside the Trump inner circle when they were not the presidents of the United States and not the first family of the United States. They were reality show stars, so they were a little bit more naughty, I should say. So hello, Noel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Zev. I appreciate you having me on.
It's great to have you on. Also here, LB in LA and Greg Oliar. There's a dollar. From New York. LB, you know Noel really well, so you could tell us a little bit about why his job was so interesting, and then we'll talk to him a little bit about what the years that he spent there. Okay, now I'm not hearing you. Why am I not hearing you? Are you guys hearing me?
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Oh, now we can hear
me
you.
now.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was me. I was on mute. It's Friday. Hi,
It's Friday.
everybody.
It's cocktail hour around here. This is what we do on a Friday.
Almost.
After a heavy
This is what we
week.
do on Friday. Mine's coming
See.
at some point.
Mine's empty right
It's
now, but
okay.
I'll get someone to help me out soon.
Greg
Let's
always
spill
has the
some
best
tea.
drink. Although I have a good drink tonight. We might have to talk about it.
What are you drinking?
So, Casa Amigas.
Oh.
Not that they pay me, but I love that.
They should. Now they can.
In honor of a dear girlfriend of mine who introduced me to that tequila. So I'm having a drink for her tonight. I know Noel through Twitter, of all things. We never crossed paths, but I kind of can't believe we didn't, Noel. And I think that's mostly because you were based in New York. For the whole, you're a New Yorker, and you were based in New York while The Apprentice was taping. And I'm obviously out in California. As much as I love New York, I've never really been based there at all. I just kind of hang out there and haunt people's homes when that was possible. So I just don't think I've ever seen Noel get a proper setup of actually what his job was. And for people to really understand it, because if you're going to measure it and you're going to measure time and sort of witnessing of events of Donald Trump and his spawn and what they were up to, I don't know that anybody had a front row seat like Noel for as long as he had it. Certainly, Mary Trump is wonderful, and I love her book, and she's so brave and incredible, and such a great writer. But she didn't see what Noel saw.
Because she's family.
Family,
they don't get to see as much as the celebrity circuit. So Noel, tell us what it was. Right. Tell us what the job was all about.
Tell us your job. What was the job? Because people don't get it. They really don't get what the job was.
Well, I worked in talent logistics since 1993 on in live television. So it's a very specific thing. There's a small group of people that freelance and they go from show to show. So if you're watching the Super Bowl halftime show, that's the same people that are handling the talent on the VMAs, that are handling the talent on the, Tony Awards, to the Grammys, the Oscars, all that stuff. And I did all that stuff for 20 years. Then you do smaller shows. When you're free on a Sunday night, you want to make a buck or something, you do something like The Apprentice. And I took that gig as a lark because a friend of mine was the talent, executive, and she needed what is known as like the A-team of talent handlers. I was kind of the top guy to handle difficult talent.
Right.
So explain that. Explain what a talent handler is. What does that do?
So like I worked with Michael Jackson. I worked with Madonna. If you're doing the VMAs and Michael Jackson is booked on the show and you're the producer and the director, you don't want to talk to him directly. You want a buffer. You want somebody who's polite and diplomatic who can deal with him and his management and then go back to the talent executive and explain what they need or explain to them why you're running late. You basically want a buffer between you if you're the producer of a show and the actual talent on a show.
Right.
So that's where my world came in. We're like mercenaries in live TV. We don't show up in the credits. Everyone knows us, and they know that we can deal with these people.
It's so
because
true.
you can't go to school for that. You know, you call in somebody who's already dealt with that.
It's a very rare skill.
Right.
It really is.
It's very rare because you have to be diplomatic, but you also have to be funny. You do. You have to show up and get everybody. You have to keep them in the right headspace. And you have to be smart, and you have to be quick, and then you have to disappear while you're still in the room.
That's it. So and that was my gig.
You also get to hear a lot of secrets. Yeah. You get to see a lot of things that they would otherwise not share with the world. And they assume you're going to be completely respectful and not share it with anybody else.
And you are, and I was. That's the other unwritten rule in my world, is that you don't say anything. You know, I worked with Michael Jackson. I've worked with Bill Clinton. I've worked with Madonna. I've worked with Elton John, you know, when he fired
stable, average people. No problem there at all.
Yeah. But my point is, you don't talk about it. If you talk about it, you're out of the business. And I never talked about it until 2016 when I had to. You know, when I said, I don't care if I work again. This guy's a drug addict, and everybody needs to know, because he's unstable. I wanted to tell people what we saw, and also I'll just say what everybody else saw. I'm not the only guy who saw this, you know, and there's people who saw a lot worse than me, trust me.
Because we've all said to each other and to everybody else that, you know, how is it possible that everyone who lived in New York wasn't aware of what this guy was like, and why did no one in the media really publish the truth about Donald Trump? And the reality of it is, people in New York did know. A lot of the people in the news business knew, and I was one of the people in the news business. I didn't get as close to him as others, but I certainly, you know, there were understandings that he wasn't the most up and up kind of guy. The people at NBC in particular, we'll play a little tape of that later on, they really were aware of what was going on. And yet they kept bringing him onto their shows all the time and built up this persona through The Apprentice of this guy that was a stable leader. You know, he, regardless of what you thought of the show, which was, you know, a lot of crap, but he came across as someone who was strong and powerful and could lead an organization for 10 years. It was 10 seasons, I think. After 10 years of that diet being fed to Americans in prime time, you would have assumed, hey, he could probably run the country. And, you know, as it turns out, he can't. So this was probably the biggest propaganda effort to try and create the next president of the United States. And whether they did it willingly or knowingly, who knows? But it certainly has, that was the end result of it.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, Mark Burnett maybe had some eyes on a larger prize, but for the rest of us, or at least people in my world, Trump was a joke. You know, I grew up in New York in the 80s. He was a punchline, and no one took him seriously. He can't, you know, he can't read. Like, he literally is like dyslexic. Like a 3-syllable word freaks him out. So nobody thought like, this guy's going to be the president. And everybody, at least the people I knew in New York, knew that, you know, he didn't have any business acumen. You know, everyone knows what he did. He laundered money, you know, and he went out to clubs at night and chased models around and got high like that. I'll shut up. But I worked on the beauty pageants too.
This is what we want to hear.
But I remember this one anecdote always sticks out. You know, I'd seen him like right before I worked on a pageant. I was doing a VMAs, you know, Video Music Awards at Radio City, you know, and they closed off 51st Street, and it was a big long red carpet, and Trump pulled up, you know, because he wanted to go to the VMAs. I think Ivanka was his date, and I'm not kidding. Like, literally, teenage Ivanka was his date. And he gets out of the limo, and he's waving at everybody, and I'm standing next to a cop, and I'm like, oh my God, Donald Trump, you know, because you grow up in the 80s as like this cartoon character, you know. And he goes, you never met him before? And I said, no. And he goes, oh, dude, I used to be on his security detail. That guy's the biggest poon hound in New York City.
Really?
Pardon me. He goes, he's out every night in the clubs trying to bang models, bro, and getting high. Like, that dude is a player. You know, the cop was saying it like it was kind of a cool, funny thing. And this guy was a patrol cop. You know what I mean? Yeah. This guy was in uniform guarding like a public event.
Fine. I mean, if that's what he wanted to do as a businessman, a reality show star, whatever, it's you know, all the power to him. But
he
you know,
put a lot of effort into it. It was a lot.
Right. And that's what my point is, that was public knowledge. Like, nobody took Trump seriously. He was a socialite. Trump would have rather been famous he is famous, but he would have rather have been some sort of celebrity than president, I think.
I think so. I think he's sort of forced into this job.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg, you know Noel quite well. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about the sort of I call it the Citadel. I call it the New Yorker Citadel. It's like you go in, you're surrounded by all these other rich and powerful people. You get to hang out with them in all the parties and you get to see them all the time. You learn secrets about them. But there is this sort of rule that no one talks about the people inside the Citadel to anybody outside the Citadel. If there are secrets, there are secrets, and you're not meant to share those secrets outside. And so, news anchors can be gay for 20 years and not have to come out of the closet because it's a secret that we all just held for whatever reason. It is a little bit like that in my experience in New York. What do you think about it, Greg?
I think, first of all, going back, Noel, to what you were saying about Trump being a figure of ridicule, I was looking the other night at my old spy magazines from the 80s when I got a subscription. Like my mom gave me a subscription I was in high school, so I was 16, and I had no idea. We lived in New Jersey, and I had no idea who half of the people in the magazine were. But man, they are relentless. They were relentless attacking Trump. Every issue, they just hit him and hit him and hit him. And remember, it was Graydon Carter, I think, who wrote the short-fingered Vulgarian bit. Yes. And the line that makes him so crazy. Like, that's from Spy Magazine. And that was a long time ago, Right. So he's been the object of ridicule for quite some time. I lived in New York City for 10 years. I don't know that it's a citadel as much as all that, but there is kind of an unspoken rule, which I don't know if it's the same even in Los Angeles, where there's a lot of tourists, more tourists, I think, and people spread out. When you see a celebrity in New York, you leave them alone. You don't engage. You don't go bother them at dinner because it's uncool. And you're in New York and you're a New Yorker and you're cool. So you have to leave them be. So I think it's more that than anything else in terms of the Citadel thing. And also sort of because it's such a concentrated space, like Manhattan is really small. Yeah. And there's only so many restaurants and places to go. Sometimes you just see people just walking down the street and you're like, wow, that's so-and-so. And they're just walking down the street like I am. And okay, it's fine. I mean, I don't think Trump
and that in my don't have time. They don't have
New Yorkers don't have time, but they do keep each other's secrets. They don't have time to
mess around with.
If you only get to stay in the club if you keep everyone's secrets. Like the minute you start spilling secrets about people inside the club, you're no longer part of it. You don't get invited. So, the access to the parties and to all these, fancy events and the access to all these other celebrities comes with a sort of an unspoken agreement that you'll keep their secret secret. And that's how I think we landed up with a Donald Trump, being who he is and the rest of the world not finding out about it until he became president.
That's an excellent point. I mean, Truman Capote was cast out of New York society for spilling the secret, and that same society is what Trump aspired to be. He was a kid from Queens who was never accepted, but he wanted to hang out with the Astors. He wanted to hang out with Peggy Guggenheim, and I lived in Carnegie Hill. I mean, that's my neighborhood in the city. And, it's a very small world, when you take from, if Trump is further down Fifth, but, all of these characters that we see on the national stage now all lived in one small area, like a 2 square mile, and you'd see them all. You'd see Geraldo, you'd see Sam Nunberg, you'd see Roger Stone around town, and these guys, I know the Weinstein brothers, like these are my neighbors. It still freaks me out seeing them on, where they've fallen, and keeping those secrets is also what allowed this to happen for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it works for them. Yeah. It doesn't work for the rest of us because here we are with Trump. So one of the biggest things you revealed about Trump is the drug use. You did it in a spectacularly public way. Tell us a little bit about what made you say what you did, and tell us about the story of telling the world about that.
Well, I'll just say, it's not about he's an active drug user. He crushes Adderall. That's his maintenance high. I've seen him do it. I've seen it fly out of his nose. And he's done cocaine. He does coke at parties. That also was not a secret. And ever since I came out about it, people come up to me. Right. That's that goes way back.
Both coasts knew that.
Right. Exactly. But the point in revealing, like, if he could do his job and still did drugs, I wouldn't say anything about it. You know, I used to tour with rock bands. I took care of septuagenarian drug addicts for a living. Like, if you can do the gig, I'm not judging you. Yeah. So my point isn't like, ooh, drugs are bad. You know, I have my own history with that stuff. My point is, if you know anything about addiction, the underlying mental state of an active addict is one of self-centeredness, you know, and vindictiveness and seething resentment. And that's what you would see in Trump, you know. So despite the fact that he's using these illegal drugs, it's the syndrome of addiction, you know, the disease of being an active mental addiction that scares me the most. And that's why I chose to speak out. And I did it I was telling people about it, and, you know, I didn't have much of a reach. So I went into stand-up comedy because I was like, well, it's a way to talk about it and a way to sort of like, it was therapy for me as an art, you know, because I was a performer and an actor, and I was like, I just got to get this off my chest. I got to tell you guys what you're dealing with. You know, I traveled the world with like David Crosby. You know, I worked with the Stones. Like, I've been around rock stars. This guy's the craziest drug addict I've ever met in my life. And I'm not saying that mildly. If you get my point and you really understand addiction, it's terrifying. You know, it's not, oh, he's doing a little coke with models. He's thinking about himself all day long. And that's what you see in his tweets. It's all resentment. It's all self-centered fear. It's all me, me, me. The last thing you want in a leader is somebody who's thinking about himself. You want a leader who's like, this is about you guys, not me. You know, how can I help you? Trump's only about himself. And I'll shut up. But the reason I really went public with it is the guy I know would drop a bomb to save face. The guy I know is so detached from reality that if he thought he was going to be publicly embarrassed, I could see him literally like starting a war. And we're kind of seeing that now.
Well, we have seen it. I mean, we sort of see sociopathic behavior from him all along. Like every time he can, he'll distract no matter what. And it does all seem to be revolve around him. It's hard to, you know, I don't want to psychoanalyze somebody, but it's hard to tell whether the drugs were treating the sociopathic tendencies or the other way around. But, you know, one of those might have been a precursor to the other. You decided to do this in public, in like a comedy show. You were doing comedy routines, or? Yeah, I was doing it. How did it go down? How did it, like, what were people like when you were out there saying all the stuff? They react with? They were like, oh my God, that totally makes sense. Like, I get it, you know? And then they'd wait around after the gig. I would do it at Gotham's and Caroline and stuff, and Caroline's, and they'd be like, is that true? And I'm like, 100% true. And I tell people, like, you see it for yourself. That's why he's sniffing in the debates. I mean, that sniffing is from sniffing it back up. If you look at the side of his nose, you can see where he had a septoplasty, because he did so much coke that he blew out like the inside lining of his nose. You'll see the big scar right there. Wow. And I would tell people, like, if you don't believe me, go look for yourself. You know, go look at the evidence yourself of the guy you see in front of you. But yeah, it is. And you can't get a job in America in a lot of companies if you have a drug test. But apparently, you can be the president of the United States. Right. And let me just make this other point. You know, I live on the Upper East Side, and like, I know a lot of people that have had drug problems, you know, and I don't use any drugs anymore. I've had my own history with that, you know, so I'm somebody who's in recovery. You know, I don't talk about that stuff publicly, but I'm in recovery. So I know a lot of people on the Upper East Side that got their drugs from the guy who gave Trump his drugs, and that's Dr. Bornstein. You know, he was known as a Dr. Feelgood on the Upper East Side. And that's why the first thing Trump did when he became president was send Keith Schiller, you know, and another guy, possibly Matthew Calamari, to Dr. Bornstein's office. I remember that. They cleared out everything. And they took his medical records. Right. And that wasn't because he has high cholesterol. You know what I mean? It wasn't because of his alopecia drugs or whatever it was he was taking.
Are you sure it wasn't the Valtrex?
The Valtrex might be some of it. He's a Valtrex user as well. But so, you know.
Speaking of Schiller, he is part of our game that I want to play with you tonight.
I was somewhat joking.
Somewhat.
Oh no, Captain.
So the game I want to play is the game I want to play is called Real or Trump. I'm going to show you a few things, and you just have to tell us whether it's real or Trump. Meaning, you know,
this is so new.
It should be fun. I know. I just did it a few minutes ago, so it's a little rough, but let me see what we come up with. Let me see part one here. This is a little cut off here, so let me pull up on a bigger screen so you can see it properly. This will take a little bit of this. You can talk amongst yourself for a second while I try to figure this out.
Is it real? Could it be real and Trump? Because that's his Twitter handle, real Donald Trump.
Oh, it's so
right?
true. It can be. Well done. Well spotted.
Yeah.
So the first one here is about whether it's true, or sorry, whether it's real or Trump, that The Apprentice saved Donald Trump's fortunes.
That's true.
It is
Real.
So tell us when and how that happened. We're talking about.
Well, he had blown his money. He'd blown his father's inheritance. So by the time Mark Burnett came to him, he had blown the $400 million through his bad investments and his properties that were failing, and needed a paycheck. So when Mark Burnett came and NBC gave him that paycheck, that was like the first real paycheck they had in a long time. That's why he got all his kids involved. They would like ask for per diems. You know what I mean?
That's the most money he's ever made, really, on a real
Easily.
like a real
On his
basis.
own.
Yeah,
easily.
Right.
And when they went the first season, my friends were like the production guys and audio guys on The Apprentice. I worked on the celebrity version, which came about later. But when they went to film the first season of The Apprentice in like 2003 or 4, they went to his office and all the furniture and everything was so ratty that they had to rent furniture from a prop company to make it look like the guy was actually a billionaire and a big shot.
I was going to ask you about that. It's like was the helicopter in that sequence real at the beginning? Was it his helicopter?
The helicopter was real.
Okay, so at least he had that.
Yeah. No, he had the helicopter. He had things with his name on the side.
Right.
But he didn't have cash flow. He was sort of property rich, name rich, because most of his properties are licensing deals, but cash poor. And that's why he took a star deduction on his income tax every year in New York City. If you know what that is, you have to make less than $500,000 to qualify for a star deduction.
Wow. It
has to do with the public schools. He would take it every year. And when he got busted, he would say it was a mistake and then he would take it again.
Wow.
There's nothing too petty for him. And he's like, he's a fraud. As you're seeing now, it's that look. So did you get that from my Twitter?
I happened to stalk your Twitter account a little bit today and your Instagram. It's good research.
Let me tell you about that. That hangs in 8H. In SNL, if you've ever been where they film SNL at NBC Rock Center, the hallways have pictures of all the hosts that this woman, Marianne, I believe is her name, took throughout the years. So if anyone's ever hosted, you get your picture on the thing. So that's Trump's picture from when he hosted. But he made them Photoshop his hand. If you see how large his hand looks.
He does have a very large hand there.
Yeah.
They
blew it up.
So this is a Trump. This is not a real. This is a Trump because of the hand. We will say.
Right.
It's a real photo of a Trump hand.
That photo, if you go just to the right of the pages desk, just down the hallway, that photo's on your left, about 4 in.
I wonder how they photoshopped it. Looks pretty good for Photoshop, actually, and it does look like a normal size hand, which is a good thing, I guess, for him. This is on the opening of The Apprentice. There's all these companies that are listed that apparently people in The Apprentice could work for or could own or run. I don't know how they did it if they won The Apprentice. So in this case, there was a company called Capital Edge Corporation. Is this a real or a Trump?
That looks like a Trump to me.
Looks like a Trump. Does anyone else recognize this name?
It looks like Cyrillic letters. I think if I'm blurry, it looks, almost like it's Russian. No, I don't know. I don't know.
It's possible. Okay, 2 more. This one I'm really interested in. So here is a picture.
Right, but what is it? Is it real or Trump?
I would say it's a Trump, and I think Noel said it was a Trump too.
Trump.
Yeah, I don't think he really owned those companies. He was just like, run one of my companies, but it wasn't really them.
Oh yeah. No, he doesn't have any companies. There's like 5 people that worked in his office.
Well, that's what I think he was trying to get away with the idea that you could run Capital Edge Corporation if you wanted to.
Right. Calamari, like
exactly.
Guys.
So this is a photo from your Instagram that you took at one of the Apprentice finale tapings, I think. And if you look closely on the left-hand side is Kurt Schiller. You were just talking about him earlier on, and he was for a while the president's sort of head of security. And what do you think he's doing over there?
Well, I know what he's doing because I was there and I took the photograph. And that's our final home. The last 3 seasons was the Museum of Natural History. And ironically, the Lafrac Theater. Richie Lafrac is a good friend of Trump's. But so if you know the Museum of Natural History, the ground floor is like where they have the IMAX theater and all that. So we filmed that there. That's Keith pulling a blonde. He's pulling that blonde to bring her to the after party for his boss.
So Trump used to send out Kurt Schiller to go and get these blondes and literally from the crowd pointing at her there saying, come on, get her. That's for the boss tonight. Wow.
Exactly. Which is what, which is what they used to do in the rock and roll business, and they stopped doing before my time. But it's called a pull. That's the technical term.
It's got an actual term.
Yeah, a pull.
It's an industry term.
It is.
Well, he might still do it. Who knows? He might still show up at his. Maybe that's why he likes to go out on the road so much. He likes to, you know.
100%. That's why he goes to Mar-a-Lago. That's why he's in Bedminster, because he doesn't like the people around him. You know, there's too many eyes in D.C. He's not bringing. They're not doing any polls at the White House, you know. But
this is the least likeliest person in the world who you think would want to be president of the United States. Like, he just does not feel like he fits the role at all. Did he ever talk about politics? I mean, did he ever come across as someone who was interested in politics? Who was just like power and greed?
Here's the one thing he did is that he would walk around like he was president even back then. And like that right there, that where we shot there, we had the after party at like a ballroom that's connected to the Museum of Natural History, and it's up a flight of stairs. Yeah. It's like a big room, right? So when this ended, you know, half an hour later, the party would start. Trump would wait out in the hallway until all the celebrities got into the party. And there's celebrities, I'm talking like Tom Green. It wasn't like Beyonce was there. You know what I mean? It was like museum, you know, it was like a Celebrity Apprentice on a Sunday night in like May, you know? Yeah. So it was like, celebrity is a real loose term, you know. But Trump would wait by himself with Keith and a couple other bodyguards until the room was packed, and then he'd want to make a grand entrance. So he'd walk in with those guys doing like a phalanx in front of him, like it was like they were Secret Service, and he would walk in, you know, with his head up in the air, like everybody was going to turn and be like, "Wow, look, the president's in the room." But he never
likes this pomp and ceremony of it all more than he did.
Exactly.
Did they stop and turn? Does he have that sort of natural charisma?
No, he doesn't. You laughed because you'd already just seen him. Because the only celebrity, right? It was literally
it was like another entrance.
Right. It's like we just spent 4 hours with you trying to get through this taping while you we had to stop down because of whatever technical difficulties.
That's fantastic.
But
I mean, contrast with.
No,
go ahead. Your story's more relevant anyway.
But
I was going to say. I was going to say it's like on The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan thing. There's these when that guy walked into a room, you could sense it even before you saw him. You knew he was there, right? And he had this and has this incredible charisma. So, which, just to be clear, Trump does not have.
Right.
Yeah, and I've met Jordan. Like Jordan does have charisma. Bill Clinton has that kind of charisma.
Yes,
Obama has that in spades. President Obama is like, boom, you're turning and looking at that guy. Yeah. And you
can feel it.
Right.
You can, it's like a negative, it's the negative space that Einstein talked about, right? Like, it's got information going in there. You can feel when these people are in the room or when they're coming, and you can feel it. And if you're someone who has some kind of charisma or anything like that, you can get a sense of that. So, and if you're around it, there's no not feeling it.
Right.
So Donald's been around enough in his life and his social circles. He's been around enough celebrity and sort of legendary people. He's put himself in situations where he can be around them that he's sensed that. There's no way you cannot have that experience of that energy. And I assume just really coveted that, like really wanted that for himself.
He did, but you can't fake that, you know, and I've been around a lot of that too. And there's people that'll play that up. Michael Jackson would make you lock down the hallways when he would walk through. And I would have to tell like U2 at the VMAs, they had to stand down because Michael was coming by, you know. I don't want to get in trouble, but, you know, like other famous female singers have done that kind of stuff, and it's manufactured and you sense it. The people that have it naturally, like I've worked with Springsteen, you know, Bruce Springsteen, that guy emanates this energy, and he'll put on a baseball hat and try to blend in, because when you really have it, you know how attractive it is, and you want to diffuse it in public situations. Right. You don't want people looking at you. If you really got it, you can't turn it off, and you want to hide it.
Because you don't necessarily want people coming at you all the time in the way that
you never do. Yeah.
And they also the real pros, in my experience in that business, is the real pros were always the people that you were like down to earth and really you were able to talk to and deal with. It's the sort of the people who weren't really putting the attention into the work that were so into glamorizing themselves and getting all that attention.
That's very astute. Yeah.
So, by the way, we're on Periscope. If anyone wants to join with questions, there's a lot of viewers. But if you're on the other channels, okay, yeah,
there's a couple. There's someone saying, "Who did drugs with him?" Name names. That's not going to happen. We're not going to do that.
Well, I mean, it's up to Noel. Who did drugs with him?
Who did drugs? Oh, they were talking about the people in the city. Yeah. That's like people that would come up to me in like Central Park and be like, I still have, marks on my coffee table from when Trump came over, doctors and people that lived in Park Avenue. If you want a good drug story, though, a friend of mine who works in this same business was the transportation guy. And when you do one of these events, people come out and get in their SUV and they drive and then they tell our department, okay, we're ready for, Kid Rock. Okay, bring out Kid Rock or whoever, and you keep it moving. That's what the transportation coordinator does. So my buddy owns the limo company. He's one of the transportation coordinators. And we were doing a show in 2002 called VH1 Fashion Rocks.
Yeah.
It was called Fashion Rocks. Yeah.
I remember Fashion Rocks. I used to go to those things. Yeah, it was a CBS
exactly.
thing.
They were kind of fun, and so Trump came one year, and there's actually footage of him hitting on one of the models on the red carpet while he has a pregnant Melania, I believe, next to him. You can look that up. Yeah. But when at the end of that show, he came out and got in a limo with a bunch of models and started doing lines in the back of the limo, but wouldn't pull out of the alley. It was being shot at like the Armory or something. Yeah. So the guy, my buddy's like, hey, can you just move? And he's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And he's just sitting
too busy
there
doing my lines. Get out of my way. I'm going to park here.
It's like, I'm getting high with all these lines. And it's like,
don't you know who I am?
Right. Do it down the block so we can bring in the next empty car and empty this building out.
So tell me, this is around the time Melania and him met, right? You were sort of the guy looking after him when Melania and him must have been introduced to each other.
No, I mean, I first met him in the 90s on beauty pageants before Melania came in the picture. She was already married to him and they already had a kid by the time I started doing The Celebrity Apprentice, which was late 2000s, 2007. Right. I will tell you that there's no love lost between the two of them. She shows up kind of separately. They look at each other sort of with daggers. She stands back. She's there for the photo op and then she's out of there.
It's just work for her. It's just work.
Yeah, it's a contractual obligation.
And was it different?
I don't know if I believe that because they really look very happy. They look so natural together. They're
probably snuggling right now in Bedminster.
So tell me a little. Go ahead.
Hang on a second. So I don't want to just skate over that. So you said that you worked with him in the pageants. In the
pageants, the beauty pageants. That was my first experience with Trump. And that's when he would line up all the girls and, that's when he was really like unfettered, really disgusting Trump because he owned the pageant. There wasn't, way pre-Me Too. Do you know what I mean? Like the 90s were almost like the Wild West.
So he must have viewed the pageants.
I'm aware of that era.
Right.
He must have viewed the pageants as sort of a personal hunting ground. Like just for him, it must have been just I've got a candy jar here and I'm going to get whatever I want.
That's exactly what it was. And that's how he had a clause in all the thing that he could pick the winner, that like he would get the ultimate say on who won the thing. So he would line up the girls and he did this the first year he did this, cameramen are sitting around disgusted, and I'll tell this one story. Like, it cost a lot of money to film a television show. Yep. A live show, you got all these union guys on set, cameramen.
Yeah, on location, that's a multi-million-dollar thing, yeah.
It's a fortune. An hour is costing you, $500 million, right? Mm. So Trump comes out and lines up all these girls and takes an hour inspecting them, sticking her fingers in their mouth, checking their teeth, all this stuff, walking up and down the line. Cameramen are disgusted. They're going home and telling their wives, like, you won't believe this creep. He'd pick out his favorite.
Nobody stopped him?
Nobody stopped him.
Nobody say anything.
Nope.
It's kind of crazy, right? Hey, isn't that amazing that no one says anything?
Yeah, it is. But look, the guy's got NYPD security detail with him. His name is on the pageant. Yeah. You know what I mean? He wasn't assaulting them in front of you. Yeah. He was just displaying really boorish. But let me just finish. He was displaying really boorish behavior in an industry which allowed that. If you're the rich, famous guy, a lot of people knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People are there to get their seven. Yeah, they're there to get, same with this gig, you know? They know what he's doing, right? But let me just show you how it becomes normalized. So he does that the first year. It wastes an hour of very expensive union time, right? The DGA, the director's sitting in the truck, the agents, people are disgusted. They go home and tell their wives about it. When the next year rolls around and it's time to film, the pageant finale, when you look at the production schedule, there's a stop down. Trump inspects the pageant. Trump inspects the contestants. No crew call needed.
No crew's there.
So they this is how they normalized it. They built it into the production schedule so you wouldn't have the cameramen show up until that ended. Right. So you weren't having to do their start time and losing an hour of union labor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's shocking. That's even worse,
And then it just continued for
that means they knew about it
years.
and they still didn't do anything about it.
Right.
How old were the pageant people? Is this the Teen America thing or this the regular?
Miss Universe.
Okay.
But Miss Teen was 14 to 17. Miss Teen USA, which his daughter hosted at when she was 16 and stuff. And there's some disgusting footage of that. I mean, if you see how she was just ogled on the camera and Trump looking at her with pride as this guy's hitting on her. There's a great clip. You should look it up.
I'll definitely look at that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass. I've seen enough of this.
There's a lot of pictures of the two of them that are really disturbing that you can't help but think.
And I saw all that. That is a very twisted. This is like Game of Thrones situation, And she runs it behind the scenes. She runs the show. She knows how to manipulate daddy. I always tell people Trump wants to get high. He wants music to play when he walks in the room, and he wants to hit on girls. Right. Trump is into what is going to satisfy his narcissistic needs in that moment. That guy's not thinking, he's not a long game player. He's like, how do I feel good right now?
Right.
How does that hot blonde come over here and hit on me, or I hit on her and all the other men admire me and think I'm powerful? Like, that's the extent of his psyche.
So what you're saying is kind of crazy when you think about if she's got the power and she's in the White House. Is she really running the ship in there? I mean, it seems like it's in so much disarray that she might be. I mean, maybe through her husband, Jared, but still.
The two of them, they're a team, and I met them before they were dating, they broke up, then they got married. They're a team. And while Trump is out there being crazy and keeping us all distracted on Twitter all day, they're doing their things. Jimmy lost, this 666 Fifth Avenue, Cutter bought his debt out. Right.
For some bizarre reason, which no one can explain. That's so interesting. There's
an explanation. There's an explanation.
There is?
And it's been reported on. Yeah,
he shook them down with Saudi Arabia. Said we're pulling our bases out of there,
and with some of our intelligence, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically rating our intelligence product.
He gave them our.
If that's true, if he really did exchange national security intel for his own financial gain, I really hope. He needs to be in prison when this is over for the rest of his life.
That's right.
That's espionage. That's come back from that. I don't care about anything else.
He did give MBS a list of people that were, opposing him in the country, and those people were arrested and rounded up afterwards. People assume it's the same number.
We know that that's one source, and the source is The Intercept. That story,
right? That
he gave the list, or that he. MBS maybe said, "Hey, what about this guy?" And Jared said, "Yeah, I heard that," or something.
Well, there were those
we don't know the exact details of it,
so
I want to be careful not to.
I don't believe it entirely, but I do. You look at the timeline of that period of time. Jared flies over. He ditches his entire State Department cohorts and spends a few nights with
his name was.
MBS, redesigning the world. Sorry, say that again. Which guy?
There was a guy that he went with. And I said the wrong name. I apologize.
Oh, the guy with the two last names, the guy that Devin Nunes met with?
I don't know. I'm sorry, you guys. I didn't know we were going to be talking about this, or I would have had names.
It's a State Department guy, I think. There was a guy who ditched.
No, there was a guy that is a friend of
hyphenated last name. It's Cohen something.
Yeah, right.
That's it. Cohen, whatever. Yeah. And I think he was even Jared's buddy that Jared got on the NSC. Or he was working when Bannon was... Remember when Bannon was like, "I'll be head of the."
I'm going to run things around here. Goodbye to the Army generals.
Mr. Dirty. Nobody really understands my true origins. Smelly, stinky Bannon. I got to wear 3 shirts, or you all smell me. That motherfucker gets in there, and he's got, they start stacking weird people in there.
Yeah.
And I think that was Jared's friend.
Yeah, the
And
what
he
the
had
guy's
down-
really interesting. Yeah. He's had
Yeah, he
connections
is.
to
Really interesting.
a whole bunch of
Nunez,
people in
Evan
Israel.
Nunez.
Yeah.
He's the guy
Nunez and
that
a whole bunch of
Nunez,
others.
Right.
Yeah.
like jumped out of the Uber to
And
go
there was
meet,
like
I believe.
Uber. Yeah, the Uber in the
Yeah.
middle of the night. I know there's
Yeah.
so much news and everyone forgets about these things, but they're really important. And it's important not to just blow past it, and to kind of hold on to that, because we're going to have to come back and investigate these people.
Yeah.
There's major,
Yeah.
massive criminal activity being conducted with this guy, Trump, right?
Yeah.
Who can't stop shoving Adderall up his nose and inspecting girls, right? Getting his gross ass name and some kind of weird, so he can stick his hands on women, because he's the unfuckable king of the universe. Nobody wants this guy. That's why he walks into a room, everybody laughs or is repelled. So it's insane. It's insane. This is the situation.
But while that was happening, while Trump was doing that, for example, like when Jared and Ivanka were dating, Jared was out of there. Trump would call him the Jew. Is the Jew here yet? Like, he didn't want any part of that. They got back together at the behest of
his daddy, right?
Wendy Dang Murdoch is the one who put them back together after they broke up. It was like, Wendy Dang Murdoch, who was married to Rupert Murdoch.
And a Chinese spy, by all accounts.
Right. Rumored to be
born-
Putin's girlfriend, right? Got them back together. All of a sudden, they're married now. We're probably in season 2 or 3. We shot it at Skirball, which is down at NYU, right? The after party was at Trump Soho, which was never really in Soho.
Right.
It was like north of Houston or whatever. But Trump
No, I know.
insisted.
It was like
right.
calling it so,
Yeah, it was
but
not,
it wasn't there.
But anyway, that season's after party was there after the taping.
Oh, wow.
Who was
All right,
there? But
who was there? Noel, who was there?
Felix Sater, who had
Right.
Trump Organization business cards, and I watched, and he worked the room with Jared and Ivanka, and the entire audience was like Russian mobster types.
Right.
It was like our cast, our invited audience for the actual taping was all these like Russian dudes with like women with fur coats, and it was like the end of May.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
So that was used as an incentive to bring people in to buy condos at the Trump Soho, the Apprentice after party. Was that? I mean, that's
what I observed was Felix making introductions with Jared and Ivanka to this room full of Russians, to a disproportionate amount of Russians. I shouldn't say it's all Russians, but I saw what looked like business being done, if you know how that kind of business is done. So while Trump is being this buffoon in the background, these guys, as I said earlier, were looking at the long game. They were seeing, how can we use this?
There was an investigation into them
money.
They were investigated by Cyrus Vance, I think, at the time, and that's what that $25,000 payoff went to Vance's campaign, because he was going to charge them for, overestimating the number of sales that they were achieving at that place, at that Trump Soho, and the entire place was built basically by Kazakh money, because from a bank in Kazakhstan that was basically funneled through a whole bunch of people and landed up in Trump's pocket. So that's how the thing was financed.
And they also strong-armed the historical society when they built it. When it was built on the site of an old church that was an abolitionist church, and there was a lot of escaped freed slaves that were in that ground. Yeah. And they built it basically on ground that was filled with the remains of freed slaves that had made it to the north. And it was a real historical society issue, and they were supposed to, get permitting and all this stuff, and they just strong-armed it, which is an interesting aside if you think about who the man is who built the thing, and what he's doing now.
He actually built
the
condos a lot of the time during the Apprentice tapings. I mean, when you think about the growth of the Trump condo buildings, it sort of happened the same time as you guys were shooting The Apprentice. So he might have been using The Apprentice as a calling card to get all these licensing fees for his brand as he was building all these buildings around the world. That really makes sense.
And on the west side, the West Side Highway, that whole, Riverside Drive, all those crappy buildings that they took his name off of.
Doesn't that make NBC complicit? But
it was an infomercial.
Yeah.
But hang on.
It's good.
So this is worth taking a moment for, because it actually is the way that we can connect everything that Noel, all the value that he's bringing into the conversation. Whether you think we're sitting here laughing and sipping tea, which we are, right? I'm not going to say we're not, you know, you got to get in. We got to get in there. We got to get down in there. These are low people in the gutter, and we need to get down there and just bury them with this, with who they are, right? And the information, the facts. These two things are not unrelated. Donald Trump's career as a money launderer and what Noel witnessed, and the Celebrity Apprentice, or The Apprentice, which became The Celebrity Apprentice, that media property, they are not disconnected.
No.
They are not. So in 2017, myself and two other researchers did a tremendous amount of work on looking at the trajectory of money as it came in. And then Craig Ungar's book came out a little later on, and sort of, it was very similar in terms of how much he went into, and he went into much greater detail. But we really put together this incredible bibliography of that gave you this and a timeline, and it gave you a bird's eye view, really laid out for everybody what happened. So there was a transition to former Soviet Union money, which was becoming Russia at the time in the 90s, and then and then really in the mid-aughts, Donald Trump's stuff kind of took off. He did not really develop outside of the United States, and outside of even like a couple of hubs, New York, Florida. He had a couple of things going, but it was that Apprentice show that came in and set him up on this sort of stage as this, global real estate businessman. And that's when we got Trump Panama and Trump, he even went and had and Trump Baku and Trump, all these international properties where he turned himself into this licensing king, where he was just slapping his name on stuff. And I don't even know if he really because there was a big Deutsche Bank problem, a big problem at that time that Donald was having, that Deutsche Bank swept in, and The Apprentice. And this is how Noel, we started this with, how did you guys meet? Well, Noel kind of sought me out because he'd seen that I'd done this thread that actually was one of the big things and I had people encourage me, you got to tell that story. You got to tell that story. And I'm like, I don't know if I should tell this story. I was just this little Twitter account at the time, but I was on Twitter and in the space so that I could put out what I knew and also find other people who knew stuff and try to put the story together. Because I just couldn't believe that this motherfucker had become president, and that so many people knew who he was and what he was and how embedded he was, that he came out flying out of the underworld's womb of organized crime. And here he was, all of a sudden, our president. And I felt a lot of, I guess, proximity responsibility, just in terms of, I knew the people around Mark Burnett that had enabled that show. And so that, all of a sudden, if you're in Wisconsin, you think, oh yeah, that he's the boss, and he was
really big in the Midwest. Actually,
he fires people, right? And they didn't know. They really didn't know that he was a criminal. New Yorkers knew. People out here in LA, we knew. Everybody knew. But the average American voter didn't know. They bought the story that had been packaged and put out there. And it's really important to note that without that show, the show was like a trust wash. It was a trust wash. And it was a front, a sort of trust washing front as well for this man's continued exploitation of his name so that he could license it and use it and get into these global properties. But when you do the background research on all those properties from Panama on up, they are all tied to really one gangster in particular, Mogilevich, and his empire. It's all those people. So when Noel says he was at Soho and he was watching Felix Sater walk around with all these guys, and all these guys in New York, they all kind of know each other. They're all connected. That's what we say. The mob says, he's connected, because they're connected.
Right.
That's how the mafia fucking works. That's why you end up with that term. They're connected. I'm not trying to throw Felix into this bucket of saying he's somehow an operative for Mogilevich, because people have done that. There's skepticism around his father. There's all this kind of stuff. That's a whole other ball of wax.
There's not a lot of skepticism, but I think it's still true. I mean,
we don't need to talk about.
He's
a very tricky guy. Yeah, I don't want to divert the conversation into that guy. He's he's swimming in intelligence services, covered in all of this of like, I was, thinks he's James Bond, but he really was just an informant to get out of his own criminality. So whatever. But the point being, what Noel witnessed and what Mark Burnett actually enabled, whether he was a participant, whether he was knowing or not. It's hard to believe he didn't know.
Hard to believe.
But hard to believe. But regardless, what he enabled was for this man to make the transition from being sort of fully owned by the five families in New York City and being mobbed up at that level to being this businessman front for a transnational organized crime, which was becoming something very different at the time. And those two things happened together. The Apprentice and his move into transnational organized crime and laundering for Russian mafia and others, and those connected to the Mogilevich Empire, which stretches beyond the former Soviet Union. Donald Trump's move from New York City gangsters, right, to as business front for them, to the business front for this global empire, happened with The Apprentice.
Yeah. And so let me add something else. It happened with The Apprentice, and it happened with the Miss Universe pageants. They all combined at the same time. So he was traveling around the world. Right. He gets these mob organizations around the world who are, wanting to build these condo towers. But these condo towers are really just fronts for money laundering. People are buying condos because they want to wash their money through those condo towers. I don't know how many condos in each tower, but there's a lot. Now, the reason why Trump likes the licensing piece of this is if they get bust for their money laundering with their condos, he's just a licensee, and hey, they don't wanted my name, I gave them my name. But what he also gets on top of that he doesn't talk about as much is the management fees. So he gets the licensing fees, but he also gets 10% a year for running the building, or 15%, way higher than you would normally charge for those things. So you've basically got a guy who's enabling organized crime around the world by enabling money laundering through these condo towers, but is also profiting off organized crime around the world. And that a major network in the United States is publishing as some sort of legitimate businessman, but he's not. I mean, it's a complete lie, everything they're putting on TV every week. And they're encouraging the growth of this organized crime syndicate. They're the marketing arm of the mob, basically.
Yes. One more thing to add here is that Mark Burnett, after working on The Celebrity Apprentice, tried to develop a show about Putin. For real?
No, before.
Oh, it was before?
No.
Okay.
Yes, this is actually an incredible story that people also don't focus on, that everybody should know. Several of us were banging on the door of the New York Times, and they were receptive to taking these stories in 2016, and they were fishing for stories, frankly, in our own industry boards. People think the entertainment industry works a certain way, but unless you work in it, you don't get it. And even journalists might not get it. And so there were even group boards, like, work boards where people, assistants and everyone gather together and say, can I get the script? Do you know this assistant over here? Can we blah, 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 blah. That exists in our town. And they're hard to get on, and you have to be sort of a legitimate person. And so journalists were fishing for these tapes. They wanted these Apprentice tapes because there have been rumors about them, and the rumors were true, and people knew, and they were talking. Noel knows. They were folks that he know. Everyone was trying to raise awareness because they thought, okay, if people could just hear him, if you could just hear him, right, then you'll get it. You'll get what he is. Because it wasn't just the racial slurs. It was everything. It was everything about this man. And what he said about his own kids, there's just shit on there. And there's no way you can work on a production in this town. And if you go, everybody has headsets on a set. So Noel, you could talk about this too. So you go and everyone's got headsets on. They can all hear. If you're recording, whether it's a live recording, whatever it is, they can hear everything. Zev, you can hear everything. Everyone's got it. And you guys tell me, because you've been on more, I'm on movie. It's different in movies, but somebody drops a word or says something off color, it doesn't go unnoticed. It's seared into your, it's very rarely happens. No matter what anybody thinks about us, it very rarely happens. We're not those people. And it gets seared into people's minds. They know and they remember this. So all of that stuff about those tapes was real. And at that time, and there was many of us handing everything over to journalists and to, trying to break the story and get this story out and say, here's some business affairs people who will talk to you. Here's the agents that will talk to you. Here's like just gathering everybody we could for whatever our piece of knowledge was. And it all got buried. Nothing really came out.
Nothing comes up because
I don't
it's
know
part
why.
of. I'll tell you why, and I'm going to just riff a little bit here.
I
want to play a little bit of the tape, and I want to explain all this, and it sort of builds onto everything else because our networks are run by news corporations, I should say, that own the entertainment division and the news division. When Donald Trump becomes a celebrity within the umbrella of NBC, he becomes protected by all of NBC. So the Today Show and NBC News and Dateline and all those other people are treating him like a member of their family, not like someone that they should be investigating. And what's more is that sort of extends to everybody in network television because, hey, we'll respect your family and you'll respect our family. And so what you land up with, and I'm going to play you some tape of what it was like when Donald Trump, this mobster that we're talking about, this guy who was selling all these condos around the world to mob organizations and laundering money and doing all these things with women and drugs and who knows what else, shows up on the most important show on television, which is the Today Show back in the 90s, or even the 2000s, or even the 90s. When was the show premiering? When did the show premiere? 2004, probably.
2004.
So, so in the early 2000s. So this was, Katie and Matt were the thing. And in the morning, they could determine whether someone was going to make it or not. And there were personal relationships with those people mattered. And they did a lot to build up the credibility of Donald Trump. Now, this is the news division now. This is not entertainment. This is the news division, whitewashing everything about him. And everybody loves these two in the morning, so everyone believes them when they seem like they like Donald Trump. So take a look at the tape, and then we'll dissect it afterwards in a second.
The TV series The Apprentice brings together 20 ambitious contestants hoping to survive in New York's corporate jungle. Donald Trump and Mark Burnett, good morning. Nice to see you guys.
Hello, Katie.
Why? I
have absolutely no idea.
But The Apprentice was a giant hit.
You're fired!
And when the season ended in April, Trump was ascending to new heights.
At a bar in Chicago, the hometown of the new Apprentice, it sounded as loud as a Cubs victory party.
The Apprentice portrayed Donald Trump in the most flattering possible light. As the host of the show, Trump came across like an able commander, a morally strong but fair leader, and a tycoon who couldn't fail.
Doesn't it?
I've always got a lot of attention. This is getting a little ridiculous, and I had no idea it was going to be this way.
Come on.
Katie, don't
get started with me.
They told me you were going to be nice today.
Trump the man wasn't the only beneficiary of the show. Trump the brand was featured prominently, from Trump bottled water to the troublesome Atlantic City casino, the Trump Taj Mahal.
Well, he may have a hit show right here on NBC and plenty of money in the bank, but Donald Trump's hotels and casino resorts are in deep debt to the tune of nearly $2 billion.
The casinos make less than 1% of my empire, so to speak. I mean, it's a relatively small investment for me.
The Apprentice was immediately renewed, and Trump's popularity was at its peak.
Donald Trump is calling for a redesign of the World Trade Center site to, in effect, rebuild the Twin Towers, making them 1 foot taller than the originals.
He soon married longtime girlfriend Melania Knauss at a celebrity-packed wedding.
Who was the most glamorous guest in your view?
Well, I would say, you had Anna Wintour there and Andre Leontali from Vogue, who were terrific people, and Hillary Clinton looked fantastic.
So there you go. This is not very critical journalism going on of this guy. It's a free access to a network news operation to publicize everything he's doing for a whole lot of time. That is unconscionable. I mean, it's unconscionable that you've got this situation happening in what's supposedly an independent news this world where you've got free press and a free media. And this is the problem that we have with network television, is that this is the kind of crap you get on network television. You can't believe a thing that they're broadcasting.
It reminds me of the old Norm Macdonald joke where he said NBC is the national broadcast company, but the problem is they don't tell you which nation.
Right. It's true. In this case, it could have been Russian for all we know. It really is. It's shocking. And I've worked in network television for many years. I know what it's like in there. You're on mute, by the way, LB. I think you're on mute.
That's funny. I was saying I never heard that before. That's so funny. Well, here's the thing. I think corporate capture of news is and how everything's been siloed right up into these big corporations. I think that is yes, it's a huge part of it. I think the way that attorneys at news organizations have become the barriers for getting the news out, instead of just like, you guys go to the news and we're behind you and we'll fight whatever comes your way. It's like a layer now you have to get through in order to even put a story out. And I think that's a real problem. I mean, there's a lot of problems. I think it's a little bit more sinister with this guy. I'm sorry, I do. I think it's a little more sinister. I think some of it can be explained as people just didn't think he was going to win, and so they didn't want to take a risk. That Citadel thing that you were talking about, Zev, I think it's way rougher out here in where, although you think of the news organizations being based in New York, the big entertainment companies that own them are out here. And, you know, this is where, you know, people knew at a very high level that would shock people.
Katie knew. Katie and Matt knew everything. You should go jump in.
Katie is a super sweet person, and Katie lives in my neighborhood as well, and she couldn't be nicer. But you saw that exchange where she goes, "Yeah, you love the attention, Donald," because she knows him. If you're in that circuit, you're going to events with him. You're going to charity galas and all this kind of stuff with Trump, you know. And it's, you know, I was at NBC the morning Matt Lauer got fired. He was our host on a show I do every year called The Tree Lighting at NBC. It's on a Wednesday, and they light a tree lighting at Rockefeller Center. You know, and Matt was supposed to be our host that morning he got fired, like 2017. And I remember showing up in the morning, they're like, Matt just got escorted out of the building. Like, we're not using him as a host, you know? But, and I have friends that work at Today Show, and nobody was surprised. The
same thing. Everybody knew about Weinstein. Everyone knew about Lauer. People knew about all these people. They just didn't do anything, and they didn't report about it. So we can't blame, we can't blame America for choosing a bad president when, how are they meant to know? How does America meant to know if the journalists are failing at their core job?
Can we talk about the journalism for 1 second? I don't want to detour too much, but I worked at the Associated Press in human resources for 7.5 years. So I know more about how this stuff is kind of set up, which is in traditional newspapers and publishing companies, there is supposed to be a wall between the publishing side and the editorial side, where the publisher, the publisher picks the editor and then is not supposed to interfere at all. And obviously there's going to be times if you know that Rupert Murdoch owns your newspaper, you're probably more likely to, write something in a way that he would like, and also he would hire somebody that he, might share his views. Similarly, maybe the Washington Post that's now owned by Bezos is less likely to write a hit piece on Amazon, whatever. But for the most part, you have these things where there's a firewall. And one of the reasons that the Watergate news coverage was so successful is because Katharine Graham at the Post let Ben Bradley, do his job and didn't interfere. And Bradley let the reporters do their job and didn't interfere. And my point of this is that what we see on the TV, especially, and what the news organizations and the sort of collective media consciousness decides what we're going to talk about, is very seldom caused by or actuated by the journalists who are doing the work. Because I think most of the journalists who are out there doing the work are good and doing good work. And I want to make sure that we make that distinction.
And a strong journalist.
Including, by the way, the White House press corps is getting hammered. And I think they're doing great. There's been a lot more pushback. That's a terrible job.
But something's going, it's a terrible job, but something is going on there. They won't ask the question. They'll ask Kayleigh, but they won't ask him. They won't ask him about the bounties.
Karam asked him and he won't answer. There's stuff that we don't see. And I don't know who's there. Is Oanon whatever have 17 reporters and
yes. And he's not calling on them. My uncle was White House bureau chief for Time magazine. The only questions that are getting asked now are who Trump calls, and he's calling friendly reporters. He's not calling you Michal Cinder, who would definitely ask him about the Russian. Brian Karam has shouted it at him as he walks out of the room. They know how to play the game.
They've got a because of COVID as well. There's a smaller press corps in there. They've got only a few people in there. Right. So there's, they keep social distancing.
I'm going to qualify myself now to play the game. This is how hard it is to figure out how to play the press. Ready? Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
Got it.
You got it backwards. You messed it up.
Say it again.
TV,
See if you can get it right.
Camera. I did not.
There you go.
I'll do it back. I can do it backwards. TV, camera, man, woman, person.
Okay, you did it. Well done.
So I can absolutely handle the complications of that task.
Yeah.
But look, a couple of things popping up. First of all, my phone went crazy when we brought up Katie Couric and failed to mention that she knew Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh yeah, no, I haven't got a Jeffrey Epstein.
Everybody knew Jeffrey. I mean, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Jeffrey. Wait, let's finish your thought. Do you want to talk?
Finish my thought.
Yeah.
Actually, is on that in terms of the Citadel, in terms of what people know, in terms of we could say, yeah, there's stuff about Trump that everybody knew that was anywhere in the vicinity of him. You cannot. None of these people can play dumb, but I do find DC to be uniquely idiotic and just ignorant of both New York and money and the nature of all these things, and Los Angeles and Hollywood and how that industry works. Like, I do find it, from politicians on. I mean, Harvey Weinstein. You want to say everybody knew? Well, everybody here, we all knew. Yeah. Everyone in New York knew. Everyone out here knew. But, the DC Democratic Party that he was all up in, raising money and throwing fun. These people, these psychopaths know how to, like Jeffrey Epstein, like Harvey Weinstein, like Donald Trump, they know how to behave in a circle they're swimming in. I think Donald has less boundaries around all that than those two other men. I think they're really good sharks. They know how to swim in. And so you could see people in Jeffrey Epstein's flight log and all this that may not have, you would say, well, everybody knew he had young girls around him, but that doesn't mean they were in that part of Jeffrey's world. Jeffrey could compartmentalize, and he could, or he wouldn't have been successful. And
that's
so did
that's
Harvey.
how you buy cover.
That's how you buy. That's exactly how that they did. Is they bought the cover.
Right.
And so Katie did know everybody. And so did a lot of these other journalists know everybody. And they don't cover these stories because they know everybody. So they feel like, oh, I can't do that one because I know Jeffrey. And Donald Trump knew Jeffrey Epstein really well. And you were around at the time when he was, he might have visited his home. They lived quite close to each other.
Absolutely. He definitely visited his home, and they would, Ghislaine Maxwell would come to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. With Naomi Campbell, we used to do it in the Waldorf Astoria. She'd come to this show. It was like a big cancer benefit called the Angel Ball that Denise Rich, she has a big cancer charity benefit. It's on Cipriani's.
Mark Rich's wife.
Exactly, Mark Rich's wife.
Yeah. It's the other way they do it is charities, That's how they normalize themselves.
The charities.
Yeah.
I can tell you stories about those charities.
But what year was this? Because when Jeffrey Epstein and Trump says he stopped being friends with Epstein in 2004. No, I want to say maybe 2005. Like it wasn't. He said he hadn't been friends with him for a long time when he first revealed when he was arrested last year. So what year was he visiting Jeffrey Epstein's home? Because I don't believe that they stopped being friends.
Yeah, I don't either. And it's not like I saw him walk in the door. But I would see that. There's two things here. There's interesting thing is like that's a cover story, that Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. There's some kind of something went down there between the two of them. But and I don't know how charged.
He got charged. So that
he got charged.
And then there was the house
speaking of that,
it was right Bob left. It was the house.
When he got charged. Right before he got charged, Trump had a fundraiser at Howard Lutnick's townhouse, which is number 11 East 90, East 71st, right? It's number 9 and number 11 East 91st are the two townhouses. One is Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. The other one is owned by Howard Lutnick, who owned Cantor Fitzgerald, who bought it from a brokered deal from Epstein's brother. Okay. So I had business on 70th and Madison that I would go to a few times a week. So late May of last year, I'm riding down Fifth Avenue and they shut off Fifth Avenue. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, fundraiser. And I see the motorcade. So it's Trump is going into this thing. I see Trump. I see Steve Wynn. I see Rudy Giuliani. All these guys go into this fundraiser in Howard Lutnick's mansion, right? Like 30 dudes. They raise like however many millions of dollars, and then it's over. It's not a very well publicized thing. Epstein gets charged by the SDNY on July 4th. So now this is the end of May. So it's very curious to me that they had this sort of fundraiser that I felt like might have been somewhat of a shakedown. You know, like, hey, this Epstein thing's about to get in the news again. We all have been next door, and we all know what went down. You know,
it would surprise me. No. It would not surprise me one bit.
Bill Barr, Bill Barr's going to take care of it, but we all got to pony up right now.
Yeah, well, probably.
That's an interesting theory. That's a very, I don't know.
And it's just a theory, But it's
they're all being very quiet about it, and there's a lot of people who know so much, and then a lot of people are choosing not to say things, and still the news media won't cover it. I mean, it's remarkable to me how little coverage there is of the story that people are so interested in. I mean, you can't post a Ghislaine Maxwell story online and it just blows up, but on TV it doesn't even exist. Like, why? Still now it doesn't exist? It's a good story.
Maybe they wish her well. Maybe
they wish her well.
All wishing her well.
Yeah.
They're all wishing.
Can I say one more thing? And then I'll shut up. In the days after. So after Epstein's arrested, I live off of Fifth. So I do this loop a couple times a week. So I'm riding down to this thing I go to at Madison. And after he got arrested, I was like, I'm going to ride by his house. I want to see what's going down. Because I figured there'd be reporters camped out. Even though he's already in jail, it's a story. Somebody's going to do a live hit. It's going to still be in the news cycle, right? No American press were there. But an RT guy was there for like 2 weeks. A Russian reporter was on that duty every day. Every afternoon, he was there for like 2-3 weeks. I've taken pictures of it and I put it on Twitter. But this one poor, good-looking Russian dude was just sitting there like smoking his vape pen, waiting to do the hit for RT.
Yeah.
RT had tremendous interest in this story that Epstein was now being held in MCC. But no American press was out front. And I remember thinking, why are the Russians so interested? I mean, I know why they're interested, but...
Well, I mean, the potential, look, if everything is connected as we think it might be, then who knows where the dotted lines go? It could be, they could all be involved in serious financial crimes with each other, and they could all be involved in dealings that are, certainly not things you want in the press if they're not illegal, but they could also be involved in things that are illegal. And so, this could be threatening a whole elite of society in much the same way that Weinstein did and in some ways Lauer did. So there's a lot going on there that we could still find out, and they're certainly all worried. I would think
there's a lot.
Yeah,
I think I always want to leave the audience with something so that they have a framework, right, for the news that's coming, how to process it, and then what to sort of look back for, and know that we're all waiting for that too. And I'm sorry if I'm like a little sweaty because
I have this
massive, I have a 6 foot.
You're glowing.
Widow. You guys have to do this at like your time. It's whatever. My time, it's when the sun comes beating into it, beating me down. So I have a fan on me too. It's very glamorous.
It's fine. It's summer.
But it's summer. There's a way to kind of look at this, and there's I always want to promote the great accounts, I think, for people to follow on Twitter. And if any of you hate it when I do this, please let me know. Like, DM me and say, shut up, LB, don't associate with me. But Molly McHugh is a really extraordinary expert on disinformation campaigns, what they look like, right? And if you combine that with the David Shimes stuff that we did, Zev and Greg, we had this this man who had just, part of his PhDs, he wrote a really incredible book on covert election interference, and disinformation is a big part of that. And they do these things. We could think of them as active measures. We've heard that term. There's other terms of like reflexive control to try to get people agitated and upset about something. But the other thing that the Kremlin is really, really good at is setting up these sort of offensive bullshit strikes, right? Because they know that something big might come out. Some big news piece might come out, and they sort of pave the way ahead of that to taint it. So that if you hear it, and this is what people say, Donald Trump, when he does this projection, well, he's a trained propagandist. Who trained him? I think it's very interesting. I'd like to look at Ivana a little closely, but he's trained in this. He knows, I'm going to project something, and it's very intentional. He's not just like, crazy guy that just does projection. They float this shit out. They float conspiracy. They float certain kinds of things out there to pave the way for when the real news comes. By the time that story hits, you think, oh, well, we know about that's one of those fake stories. Like, we get that a lot. You guys are Q for the left. It's like, who's left? I'm not. What are you talking about? Right? We're just talking about money laundering and Deutsche Bank. What are you talking about? We're talking about, we got court documents here. Read this fucking transcript. But that's because there's all this groundwork that's been laid. And the biggest sort of commonality and thread of the same propagandists that end up doing OAN, right? That guy, Jack Posobiec, who's was part of Pizzagate and made sure, kind of took credit for that with Mike Chernovich. These are people that threw out there, right, that Hillary Clinton there's a cabal of pedophiles, and Hillary Clinton does human trafficking of children, and they're cannibals, and it's all out of this pizza place. And, and a guy shows up with a weapon because that's weapons grade, literally weapons grade propaganda, probably cooked up out of some intelligence service. And these two fuckaloos, right, go ahead and start spreading this conspiracy. And QAnon is the same kind of thing of like, there's a band of pedophiles and Donald Trump is going to expose them all. And it's all these deep state people. And we've got our Q insider who's telling us what's really going on and everything's interpreting. But again, at the core of it is always this stuff about very powerful people connected to a child trafficking ring. Same thing with Pizzagate. And it really feels like, and then you kind of trace that stuff back, and it does seem like it is all coming out of Kremlin intelligence, right? Like
most of it.
Somebody crafted this shit up, right? And then they have American operatives who are pushing it into the discourse. Why? I think it's connected to the same reason that the Kremlin knew to stick a Russia Today reporter on the street in front of Jeffrey Epstein's house. Right?
But all of that is designed to distract us from seeing the real conspiracy, which is that the head of CNN is Jeff Zucker, who was the guy who greenlit The Apprentice in the first place, who made his entire career on the back of The Apprentice in the first place, and that Katie Couric and the Today Show team and everyone else enabled Donald Trump all over those years. Yeah. And so you've got this, and again, he used to work for NBC. So you've got this system that's created a real conspiracy that we aren't allowed to look at because everyone else is being called a conspiracy theorist. But that is the actual conspiracy. The conspiracy is this man got elected because this network and these people who run these networks enabled him and told us a bunch of lies in order to get him elected. And until we fix that problem, we're going to have a real hard time in this country with democracy.
We are. And I think that the people who really elevated him, I know there's the people who trust watched him and all of that and all of the Americans that enabled it. But in terms of him, it's clear we know, because all the intelligence agencies told us, that the Kremlin has a vested interest in this guy becoming president. And I know everyone wants to, Greg wrote that incredible article this morning about how everyone wants to convince everybody to stop paying attention to Russia. But what the fuck else are we supposed to be? What's going on? This is our president. What are you talking about? He's owned by this other motherfucker, this little troll. This stupid 4chan troll guy, this incel that's the head of Russia, right? It's
unbelievable.
And what are they afraid of? What is that little motherfucker afraid of? What are they, well, apparently something what might come out around the president, around their guy, around their dog? What might come out around their little dog on his leash that would be really detrimental to him? Well, maybe it's the real relationship that he had going on with Jeffrey Epstein and the money, like what we heard from Steve.
It's one of those things. Yeah. I could go on that topic. I could go on forever because I think people aren't paying very much attention to China as well, which is really, really causing a lot of trouble right now. But we're sort of running out of time. I think we're sort of over our time a little bit. But I wanted more from Noel. So you've heard us ranting and raving a little bit here. You've been nodding your head a lot. Is this, you've been in this world for a long time. Is this what it looks like to you inside? That there is, a whole bunch of people patting each other on the back and getting away with, allowing them to get away with all of this?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a business. It's about making money. It's big corporations. There's a small example of that in last week. Mary Trump came out with a book, and I applaud her for writing the book. I think she's a hero for writing the book. But you saw the coverage on Maddow when she gave her interview, and then Lawrence O'Donnell afterwards was breathlessly talking about the breaking news of Donald Trump using the N-word. That wasn't breaking news. I've been saying that publicly for years. I'm nobody, but lots of Kwame Jackson said that he used the N-word against him on the first season of Apprentice. Omarosa Manigault wrote a book a year ago saying she heard him use, the N-word, but it only became breaking news when Simon & Schuster was in a position to make, $20 million in a day off of a book. Simon & Schuster is next door to Rockefeller Center, so it's a very, it's 6th Avenue, it's a very small geographical area where a lot of the corporate media is located. And my point in that is it only became breaking news when somebody and a corporation were in a position to make a ton of money off it being breaking news. I'm not saying those people would have me on their show or should, but for 2 or 3 years, people have been adding them. Hey, interview this guy. I mean, I've given direct quotes.
Why haven't you not been interviewed at those people? Why have you not been on these shows?
Because I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for them, but the kind of news I'm breaking is not the kind of news they want to break. I think it only becomes breaking news when, as I said, a corporation can make a lot of money off it, and when it's not that damaging.
Maybe you need a book deal, Noel. Maybe if you had a book.
I'm working on something now. I gotta get Greg to. Greg got the best interview out of me. Send me some more questions, Greg.
It was a really good.
Now, I'll do another one. A lot of people read that.
But my point is, the drug thing. Everyone knows he's on drugs. Forget about what I say. You can see his behavior now. You can see him sweating. You can see the symptoms, but nobody, asks him about it. You don't think any of those network anchors could say, you know what, I'm just going to postulate here that our president is a drug addict and has a drug addiction. I'm going to ask him. There's a guy who went on record, Noel Kassler, he's willing to testify in front of Congress that this is true, which I would, but nobody's really bringing up that story. So, and that story doesn't even matter. That's just an example at this point. We're well past that. You know what I mean? That's it.
So we have a real crisis in terms of just the press. We have a real crisis in terms of who's watching the shop. No one is watching the shop, basically.
No, they're not. And I think everybody should be really afraid because there's a lot of money in being outraged every day about what Donald Trump has. And that goes away when Biden gets elected to a certain point, and there's a lot of scarier things that are going on right now that aren't being reported, and it's actually terrifying because, it's like WrestleMania, there's a villain and there's a good guy, but the guy who owns WrestleMania makes money off of the whole production, right? And in a lot of ways, there's a big production going on right now, so, and that's back to my earlier point, there's certain things you'll give him, all right, we'll give it that Donald Trump used the N-word. But we're not gonna figure out who Katie Rogers is. We're not gonna investigate his ties to Jeffrey Epstein in a primetime fashion.
Because who's making money? CNN's making a lot of money. Jeff Zucker's, animosity towards, or CNN's animosity towards Donald Trump is making Jeff Zucker a genius for his resurgence at CNN. And that's how he's built it on this idea of, you got to have these two sides fighting against each other all the time. But that's not helping a country or democracy or journalism in any way.
No, but it's making the same group of people that are sitting out in Bridgehampton right now very wealthy.
Very wealthy and even more powerful.
They make a ton of money off of the media coverage, and then they get a big tax cut when the bad guy gets reelected.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. It's the Les Moonves quote. It might not be good for America, but it's good for CBS.
Yeah.
CBS.
Yeah.
Right.
He lost his job too.
Oh.
All right. I'll
It's
go around
very
one last
cynical
thought.
and dark. It's
Yeah.
very cynical and dark.
It is sad in a lot of ways, but that's why we have narrative.
sad.
We have narrative to bring you the truth. So people can
and
check
I
us out.
applaud you, Zev. I'm a big fan of yours. I follow your Twitter. You really do a lot of good stuff. Greg, I had Greg and LB on a podcast I used to co-host. They know what they're doing. So it is guys like you. I'm just a comedian. I'm just telling you what I saw. But it's guys like you that are doing the research and putting it out there on a daily basis. My hat's
I follow
off.
your thank you, but I follow your feed too, and it's always really entertaining and informative in terms of your perceptions.
And informed.
I mean, what you did the other day, you were talking about Ghislaine, and you just gave me this idea of, well, these guys are so close to each other. You pointed out how close Ghislaine Maxwell's home was, Jeffrey Epstein's home was, and Donald Trump's home was. It's
Right.
I don't think about it like that. I do a little bit because I lived there, but most people definitely don't think about it like that. So you're able to give us that inside view on what it's like to be in those 20 or 30 blocks. It really is all it is that run America. Those are the most powerful blocks in the world, maybe, and they contain business, they contain networks, they contain publishing, and it all happens in this confined little space. And those are the titans of the universe, So you've got an inside view of that. I hope you continue to share your insights and what you've learned along the way with everyone, because it's really great that you've been so courageous to come forward with everything you've done. Yeah, it really is impressive. Well done for you.
Thank you. I'm not courageous.
No, that is, what?
Yeah, you
I don't know a lot of people go up to the president of the United States and say, this guy was a drug dealer. I'm sorry, drug user. I don't think a lot of people would do that.
Oh, he's a drug dealer too. He was a drug dealer too.
I'm going to say that's a great place to leave it for tonight.
I think didn't John Bolton confirmed it? He said he wanted no part in that drug.
Right,
deal.
he did
Maybe
say
he was
John.
being literal.
That's what Noel was talking about, everybody.
No, you said it, so you got to tell us before I say goodbye. Was he really?
Oh yeah, Trump Tower is full of. That's where you went to buy cocaine. If you were a white finance bro in New York in the 80s and 90s, and you didn't want to go up to Harlem and buy it off the street, where you could get arrested or you could get in trouble, you could go to one of several locations in Trump Tower and buy it and not get in trouble because Trump had NYPD guys on his payroll. You weren't going to get busted going into his poker room and buying it off of Russians and stuff. Trump's, this story. Trump's helicopter pilot was a major coke trafficker, and he got busted in Ohio and was going to go to trial in Ohio. And they moved the federal case to his sister's district in North Jersey, right? And then Trump wrote a letter, and she recused herself, but a friendly judge, read a letter that Trump wrote in court about how the guy was a really upstanding citizen, this guy who was Trump's personal helicopter pilot, who was busted for bringing kilos of coke up from Florida, right? Wow. The guy gets a slap on the wrist. He does 18 months of a 3-year sentence. Then he buys a condo in Trump Tower.
How did you do that? Nice condo. If you can get it.
He had some cash left over, but yeah.
He actually got a really good deal on that condo too. So this is again what happens when you elevate a money launderer for organized crime into the highest office of the land.
Exactly.
This is what's in his background. You cannot launder money for the men that he laundered money for the crime syndicates that plural, that he laundered money for, his companies laundered money for. It was just one company, actually. It was that stupid. I don't know about all those Trump stakes. I think those were his weird cons. But that his real estate empire was a front for. It's not even an empire. I don't know what it is.
It wasn't. It was just it was a cash machine.
That's what it all was.
I got a great half story.
All that stuff is.
I got a great half story about the origins of all of that. By the way, some other time. I don't even know if I told you, Zev.
Oh, yeah. It's a good tease.
It's
a good tease. You can tell it now if you want, but we'll just keep us going.
Thank you for having me on.
Right? That's what you get.
All right, guys. I do want to hear the story. So thanks very much. What a great night. This will appear in a podcast in a couple of days. And we'll be back next week with some more exciting stuff. Thanks very much for joining us tonight on Narrative. Thanks, Noel. Thanks, LB. And thank you, Greg. And we'll see you again soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.